Okay, good evening, everyone, and welcome back to our Berean Torah Bible study. And tonight we're looking at chapter 7 of the book of Joshua, and we'll be looking at the Israelite defeat at Ai. Now, if you're from West Texas, that's Ai, but in Hebrew it's Ai. So let's begin with the blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, O Lord our God, King of the universe, who sanctifies us with his commands and commands us to engross ourselves in words of Torah. So, are there any, let me go ahead and ask, are there any comments or questions that anyone may have tonight before we get started? Okay, well then I'm going to mute everyone, and then if you have a comment or want to say anything, just unmute yourself and talk away. So I'm going to go ahead and mute everyone right now. All right. So let's go ahead with the lesson tonight, and I've got our obligatory outline here, and here we are right now at the defeat at Ai, and in chapter 7, and just so that you know kind of where that is, right here, if you can see my my little cursor, that's kind of where they think that I may be. There's a place that has, the scholars have said, yeah, that's where it's at. Only problem with it is that it doesn't have the there's no evidence that anyone occupied that chunk of real estate during the time that Joshua would have been active. And in the last couple of years, they found another spot not very far from there that does meet all the criteria, and it actually kind of falls in line with the biblical description of the terrain around Ai. So, and yeah, here's another view of that. It really doesn't give us any better information, but it does kind of give you a point of view where this is at. Here's Jerusalem down here, and then this is about 9 miles is all that is from Bethel and here Beth Aven, which is what, the house of iniquity. So you got the house of God and the house of iniquity, and I was right smack in the middle of it. So that's kind of interesting for if you were into those kinds of thinking about those kind of things. And here's a map of where they think it might be now, and there again, it's just a few hundred yards over from the other place. And so in terms of just general geography, it doesn't make any difference for what we're going to be studying. So let's go ahead with the first verses. But chapter 7, verse 1. But Bnei Israel unfaithfully violated the ban. Achan, son of Carmi, son of Zabdi, son of Zerah, of the tribe of Judah, took some of the banned things. So Adonai's anger burned against Bnei Israel. So now, if you again, if you're from West Texas, that's going to be pronounced Achan, and that's what I'll probably fall into. But the Hebrew pronunciation of it is Achan, and so I'll try to stay with that. But if I slip, well, then that's just what happens. So, all right, this chapter starts with the word. Well, in English it's but in the Hebrew, it kind of has the same meaning. That, okay, they came off of the victory at Jericho, And then the very next thing is, everybody's, yay, we defeated, God defeated Jericho. And then the very next thing is, but, and so that's the that's how the chapter starts out, and then the rest of it just goes downhill from there. And so we see that the sin of just one man defiled all of Israel, and the covenant between God and Israel was broken. Achan broke that covenant. He himself brought sin all into the camp, and brought judgment onto the camp, because then when they went to fight at Ai, they lost 36 people. And so to make things even worse, he took some of the banned things, the things that were on the prohibited list. These, remember, God had said, okay, I want you to destroy everything in Jericho, but all of the gold and silver and bronze articles, those come to the tabernacle for the support of the tabernacle. Those are going to be separated unto God. And so those things were banned. Everything else was supposed to be destroyed. And so Achan didn't do that. So there was a comment by one of the more scholarly Bible commentators, a guy by the name of James Kaufman, and he kind of had this to say about the entire chapter of this chapter 7. And what he did was he compared this to an event in the book of Acts, which I thought was kind of interesting. And I'm just going to go ahead and read it. Contrasting sharply with the previous chapter, this one reveals a shocking setback to Israel's progress, namely the defeat at Ai. When many Bible students have been impressed with the manner in which the experiences of Joshua parallel those of the early church in the book of Acts. Now, the glorious success of Pentecost was soon followed by the shameful episode of Ananias and his wife Sapphira. Here, the great success at Jericho is quickly followed by the shameful defeat at Ai. Secret sin was, in both cases, the cause of the sudden reversal of fortune, that of Achan here and that of Ananias and Sapphira in Acts. Number 3, the capital punishment of the offenders was immediately enforced, that of Achan by Joshua and all of Israel, and that of Ananias and Sapphira by the Lord himself. The punishment in each case was executed in the presence of all of God's congregation. Everybody saw it. The original success of God's people was at once resumed in both cases. So greed and covetousness on the part of the offenders was the cause of the trouble in both cases. So, so I thought that was kind of interesting, and I think Matthew Henry and others have pointed out that this chapter begins with the word "but," and with all of that entails, and it's kind of like a sour note in the symphony throughout the Tanakh. And so it's also you get the same kind of thing when you read the Brit Hadashah, and you have Matthew chapter 2 and 1 where it says, Herod, the very first word there, Herod, it kind of gives you that same slammed door change of direction, and does not end well, does not pretend well anyway. And so anyway, that's the one thing that you have to kind of understand here is that the sin of one person brought down the wrath of God on the whole congregation of Israel. So going ahead with Joshua 7:2-5. Now Joshua sent men from Jericho to Ai, which is near Beth Aven and east of Bethel, and spoke to them, saying, go up and spy out the land. So the men went up, spied out Ai, and then when they returned to Joshua, they reported, let's not go up with all the people. Only about 2 or 3,000 need to go up and strike Ai. So don't wear out all the people there, for they are just a few. So about 3,000 men from the people went up there, but they fled before the men of Ai, and the men of Ai struck down about 36 of their men and chased them from outside the gate as far as Shebarim, striking them down on the slope so that the hearts of the people melted and became like water. So, there's no record of Joshua consulting God before this attack on Ai, and evidently this is kind of like the first, if first defeat of Joshua. So he wasn't really used to that. On all the other times that Joshua was involved in something, they sought the Lord. What should we do? And God would give them instructions. Now, the spies and Joshua, they seem to be more concerned with not wearing out the people than they were in listening to the voice of God. So, I'm not sure if we can actually criticize Joshua for that, but some people do, some people don't. So evidently, Ai was not as large or well fortified as in the case of Jericho, but without God in charge, Israel could not stand up even to a small army or small city. They were chased back as Shebarim, and we don't know. There's really no other reference to this, and they say that it may be a quarry just outside of Ai that they're talking about here, because the words, there's some etymology that would connect Shebarim to a quarry. Anyway, Israel lost 36 men, but they, contrast that to when they were at Jericho, they didn't lose a soul. Everybody was protected. No one died in the defeat of Jericho. So this was losing 36 men out of how many, 40,000 fighting men or 600,000, whatever it was, that depending on who you listen to as to which how big their army was. Losing 36 men, that's significant to the families of those 36 men, but compared to 40,000 or however many 100,000, this was a small but a very it was a psychological uh, devastation. I mean, they said the people's hearts just melted and became like water. So instead of that hard pumping heart, it just dripped away like water. So um, Joshua then tore his clothes, fell to the ground on his face before the ark of Adonai until evening, both he and the elders of Israel, and they put dust on their heads. And he said, "Alas, Adonai Elohim," Joshua said, "why did you ever bring this people across the Jordan? Is it to deliver us into the hand of the Amorites to destroy us? If only we had been content and dwelled beyond the Jordan. Oh, my Lord, what can I say now that Israel has turned its back before its enemies? For when the Canaanites and all the inhabitants of the land hear of it, they will surround us and cut off our name from the earth. Then what will you do for your great name?" So um, that that was quite a prayer, actually. Joshua displayed the customary signs of grief that were, that's what they did back in those days in the Middle East. They would tear their clothes, and they would put dirt on their heads. And so I tried to find a picture. There's a picture in one of the books that I'm using that had a picture of an Egyptian woman that was putting dirt on her head as a sign um, of grief or sorrow. I don't know if you can see that picture there, and I'd have to change my okay. Whoops. Let's see. You can see that. Anyway, it was just a picture of some Egyptian lady putting dirt on her head and showing that she was sorrowful. And I'm sure you can, all of you, understand what, okay, putting dirt on your head. In fact, they still do that. So there's a group of people in Iran today that Iran that does that. That, you know, when they're mourning the death of someone, they cover themselves with this dust or mud or something, and they look like they're something coming out of the 9/11 attack in New York, where everybody's covered in this dust. So, but Joshua's his prayer, to me, just maybe as me, he seemed kind of whiny, very whiny about the whole thing, and so you know, he is questioning God as though God caused Israel's defeat. So you know, you might think, well, it's certainly understandable that this big defeat here um, uh, of Israel by, you know, a much smaller entity, um, you know, it had to hurt. It was it just had to hurt. So um, that Joshua knew that, okay, if the enemies of Israel heard about this, then what was going to happen is that they would instead of being fearful of Israel, they would come against Israel. And we already know that Israel was terribly outnumbered back in those days, which you know, I mean, they're used to it. Nowadays, you know, they're totally outnumbered by, I don't know, millions and millions of people, and nothing new under the sun. Israel has always been outnumbered, but with God on their side, they are a majority. So here he is talking about one. There's going to be a massive counterattack, and then that Israel would be defeated. Now, some people have talked about, you know, they criticized Joshua for sending out spies, apparently without any divine instruction to do so. He was just being a general and going ahead with the attack without, again, asking specific instructions like he had received from Jericho. And you know, here he is now in defeat. And so what does he do? He falls on his face before the Ark of the Covenant and puts dirt on his head. And that's, you know, to show his uh, his sorrow, as it were. So it's kind of hard. You kind of think about, well, you know, the Lord did not rebuke Joshua for any of those things. He didn't tell him, okay, listen here, Joshua, you did not ask me when you went out and fought these people at Ai. You didn't say, was it okay to send out spies? And you didn't ask if okay, 3,000 guys is enough. Okay, what tactics should we have? You didn't ask all of those. Ask me of any of those things. So therefore, what do you expect? Yeah, you're not going to win if you don't ask me first. No, God didn't say that. He didn't say that at all. Um, the you know, it seemed like that maybe Joshua was a little bit overconfident, but we do know that later on we'll see in next week's chapter that they put to death 12,000 men at Ai. So you know, basically what happened is these spies, they just blew it. They didn't have good enough information, and so when Israel went out there with 3,000 guys, and then it's like you know, it's just like old General Custer got out there and surrounded by all the Indians, and so that's militarily that's what happened. All right, any comments or questions so far? All righty, we'll keep on going. In verse 10, then Adonai said to Joshua, arise, why are you fallen on your face? Israel has sinned. Yes, they have also transgressed my covenant, which I commanded them. Now they have even taken of the things under the ban of destruction. So they have also stolen, even deceived, and even put them among their own possessions. So Bnei Israel cannot stand before their enemies. So they turn their necks before their enemies because they have come under the ban. I will not be with you anymore unless you destroy whatever is under the ban from among you. All right, so whatever the extent of God's displeasure with Joshua, the Lord ordered him to, okay, get up, Joshua, it's time to get up. And maybe he wasn't impressed with Joshua's contrite spirit. Maybe he was. We don't know. He just tells him, "Get up," and from the way that the wording is, it looks like that Joshua should have been able to kind of figure out that, okay, so why did we lose here? It was maybe should have been obvious, but that's easy for somebody to say. Um, so he must have figured that somewhere along the line there must have been some kind of sin, because that's exactly what happened at Kadesh Barnea. When the spies came back and they had as unbelief, that was the sin. Well, at any rate, the Lord gave very specific instructions to Joshua now to overcome this disaster. And so the rest of the chapter, most of the chapter, is talking about instructions of casting of lots to determine, okay, where's the guilt here, and so this is I think casting lots, that that blows a lot of people's minds about, okay, how did you do that? Now, I don't know if you're familiar with the concept of the Urim and Thummim, which is those were two stones that the high priest had in his vest breastplate, as part of the clothing that he wore. They were two stones, and they were identical stones. There's no way of telling one from the other than one of them was one color and one of them is another color. And but it's kind of like having two marbles in your pocket, and one of them being an agate and the other one being a cat's eye or something like that, only they're the same size and you can't tell. Or maybe even better, you go to the pool table and pick up two balls from the pool table, and they've got different numbers on them, but they feel the same and you can't tell the difference of them. So what they would do is they would go before the Lord and they would ask yes or no questions. And you wouldn't you wouldn't go to the Lord and say, well, should we cover the ark with a blue cover or a red cover or a yellow cover or a purple color? No, they wouldn't go like that. First of all, the Lord said that you covered it with a blue cover, but anyway, they would go and ask a yes or no question. So here's a couple of or several little deals about when they cast lots in the Bible, and this was sanctioned by God. That's the way they did it. When they divided up Canaan among the 12 tribes, that's in Numbers 26 and 55, they cast lots for that. The choice of the Levitical cities, the 6 Levitical cities, that's in Joshua 21:4. And so they, again, cast lots as to what cities would be there. So whether they used the Urim and Thummim on that, I don't know. Maybe they just had a whole bunch of lots with the names of the cities on them, and that's how they picked them. And so regarding spoil and captives in war, you see that in Joel. Here, in the case of Achan, in determining guilt, And so there's several of them, and there's more. They're in my notes. They cast lots to figure out who was going to replace Judas Iscariot, and then a famous one is in fact, there's a book of the Bible named that. It's called, or named after that. It's the festival is named after that, Purim, in the book of Esther. And that's what all that means is Purim means lots, casting lots. They cast a lot to see what day it is that they were going to kill the Jews. And as it turned out, it was a long way away, almost a year away. And so the Jews had time to go before the Lord, and God delivered them. So there's lots of cases where God uses casting of lots of some sort. So and so anyway, God is telling Joshua here, says, look, don't blame me, blame Israel. You know better than that. And so he outlined, he says there were goods that were stolen, and then there was a deception, and then there was a putting away. And so he completely outlined the sin for Joshua. And so it was definitely not God. It was sin in the camp that caused the defeat. So the consequences of sin were that, okay, loss of God's presence. They weren't going to defeat any enemies because of the sin, and if Joshua didn't take care of it, then they could they were just going to go down in defeat unless this sin was purged. Now, in Joshua 15, verse 15, there we're coming up on that. Let's go ahead and read that. It says, arise, consecrate the people, and say, consecrate yourselves for tomorrow. For thus says Adonai, the God of Israel, something under the ban is in the midst of you, Israel. You will not be able to stand up before your enemies until you remove what is under the ban from among you. In the morning you will approach by your tribes. It will be that the tribe that Adonai takes will come forward by families, and the family that Adonai takes will come forward by households, and the households that Adonai takes will come forward man by man. Then whoever is taken from whatever is under the ban must be burned with fire, he and all that belongs to him, because he has transgressed the covenant of Adonai, and because he has committed a disgrace in Israel. All right, so what we see here, that Israel must consecrate themselves, set themselves apart, get back to a contrite spirit, and to a set apart, a holy spirit before the Lord. And so that's what they're supposed to be doing. And so they have to do that just like they did on the other side of the Jordan before they crossed over into Jordan. All right, now in verse 15, I wanted to point out that it mentions only the burning by fire, that whoever this guilty person is, they're going to burn them with fire. Okay, that did not mean that they executed them by fire, because later on in verse 25 it says that they stoned Achan to death, and then they burned up everything that he owned. And so that was not a customary thing in Israel, to burn stuff up. You didn't they didn't cremate bodies, they didn't burn their executions, they didn't burn. Now they would burn cities when they're conquering, but generally speaking, punishment for a sin did not entail burning. So they had to consecrate themselves, set them apart for the Lord, because they had broken covenant, and they had to start all over again. So the articles that were taken, you got to remember, these things were the things that God said, I want these to be, these are banned things, these are mine, and basically they're going to be the sacrifice. And so I want you to those are going to be separated to me. Well, so when Achan stole this beautiful robe that some of the commentators say that with the description of it like it was, that it might have been the robe of the one of the robes from the king of Jericho himself. So just think about it. I mean, Israel had been out there in the wilderness for 40 years in the same clothes for 40 years that God had miraculously uh, kept for them. And so now he sees some really, really fancy clothes with sparklies on them. And so he says, wow, this is so much better than this drab clothing that I've got right now. So he took it, and he took some gold and silver and stuff. So they went ahead and cast the lots, and by the mercies of God, okay, he knew how it was going to work out. He was the one that he knew where Achan was. So Judah was the very first one, first tribe to be picked. And then again, since God knew who it was, he went right down the line, and they picked the family, and then the household, and then finally went right on down to the man. So anyway, that it could have gone a long time. Say, what would have happened if God had not been in charge of that, and they picked Judah last? Well, then that had to go through all the other 11 tribes. That would have taken a while. So as it turned out, it went pretty fast, I would imagine, but still long enough that the people had some anxiety just watching this process. So going ahead, is there any questions? Again, if you have any questions or comment, just jump in there and unmute yourself and give me a shout out. All right. So in verse 16, so Joshua rose up early in the morning. Whoa, okay.
Sorry, I have a question about the whole cast lot things.
Yeah.
So the times that you mentioned in the Bible, those are like the few times that these times were mentioned about casting lots, and of course in the New Testament we saw the Peter and
Yeah,
to choose
right.
Okay, so like how would that play out if somebody's doing something like that nowadays? Like, is that like still biblical? Like, have you ever heard of anybody doing any kind of thing besides that episode in the New Testament?
Rock, paper, scissors, rock, paper, scissors. No,
like saying it's God that's controlling it.
no, I don't think so today, because what do we have today? We have the Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit that is supposed to guide us. That was not given to the people back then. Remember that they had an intercessor, an intermediary between them and God, and that was the priesthood. So
Okay.
today we don't have that. We have a direct access to God, and He expects us to have a relationship, a personal relationship with Him and the Holy Spirit enough to know that, okay, this is right or wrong, and we still do it to an extent. It's kind of like putting out a fleece, like Gideon did, and we've done things like that says, okay, Lord, if we're supposed to do this, you open the door for me. And then you either have a miraculous door opening or a spectacular slam in the nose, so do we go ahead and cast lots, and take the little ball and where it floats up to the top, with what do they call that, the 8-ball? And no, I don't think I don't think we should be doing that. Yeah, Cynthia says that here a while back the mayoral election of Sealy, actually it came up with a tie, and they decided the election with the toss of a coin. So, that would have, for the winner, that's good. For the loser, that's bad, And so, but no, we don't do that anymore. I don't think it would be biblical
Okay, good. I
to
have
do
another
something like that.
question about
Sure.
burial. Okay, so you talked about not being a tradition for them to cremate and all that stuff. Is
Right.
there uh related to the whole resurrection of the body when Christ comes back and the bodies are gonna be rise and all this stuff? Does it have any grounds with that? Do you know?
I think a lot of it was a tradition of the time where the Jews, the pagans would burn bodies, so the Jews would not. Is there a prohibition against
Oh,
cremation? I don't know of any actual prohibition against it in the Bible. It was just mostly tradition, and
Well,
okay.
I had this discussion about cremation not too long ago, and the what we came up with studying the Torah, finding the answer from the Torah was the commandment for someone who died was to be buried before the sunset. I believe it was on their when they died. So within a 24-hour period, and that's where the Jewish tradition comes from. So in response to that question, in my opinion, I wouldn't say it's so much more prohibition, but I think the commandment was, and I have to double check to make sure I'm right on that.
Yeah, if you share that
Was
with us later, I
to
would
be
appreciate that.
yeah to be buried before the sun set.
right. Well, and then things were a little bit different back then too. With no refrigeration and no embalming tradition and stuff like that. It would be for many reasons. Um, it would behoove them to go ahead and get the body into the ground very quickly. We still have that tradition today. Just recently, I was called to by a lady that um, wanted me to do a funeral, and she said her husband had recently passed away, and wanted me to do the funeral. And I said, okay. So do you know when you're going to be having the burial? And she says, well, as soon as possible. And I said, okay, well, when did your husband die? And she says, oh, a couple hours ago. And she was trying to get going again. Jewish lady trying to do a Jewish um, traditional burial, to do it within 24 hours. In the scheme of things, and the way our health regulations and so on and so forth are done here in the United States, it's I guess it would be possible, but it's unlikely that you get all of that stuff done in a 24-hour period. So I'm just going to leave that with him, because it's too hard for me to think about.
Amen.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I just bring so curious, crazy questions. But
No, that's fine. That's fine. That's exactly what we're here for. And listen, we have done some classes here where I had a whole chapter and everything lined out, ready to go, and we got through 2 verses in an hour. So that's how we go. It's no problem. All right. So anyway, Joshua, he got up. He didn't waste any time. He got up early in the morning and he said, all right, let's do this. And so he called all the elders of the tribes together, and they started the process. And again, it was Judah first, and then whatever family, and then whatever household. And it finally got down to Achan. And it just, that's where it was still took a long enough time that Achan had the opportunity to confess before this, but he didn't do it. And so anyway, that's how that went down. Now, and going ahead with 19. So Joshua said to Achan, my son, give glory now to Adonai, God of Israel, and give praise to him, and confess to me now what you have done, hiding nothing from me. Achan responded to Joshua and said, it is true, I have sinned against Adonai, God of Israel. This is what I have done. When I saw among the spoil a beautiful Shinar mantle and 200 shekels of silver and a wedge of gold, 50 shekels in weight, I coveted them and I took them. And look, they're buried in the ground in the middle of my tent with the silver under it. So, we don't know the age of Achan. Now, some commentaries that I was reading said that he would have been an old man. Well, I don't know, because they said because of the way that they lined out the generations there, his lineage. But they only had like five generations there. Well, I would say that probably typical of the Bible, they don't always list 100% of the generations within a lineage. They'll skip over. Some guys, maybe they were not noteworthy or no one knew who they were, but you certainly knew who Judah was, and then you knew who another one of the who Jesse, the father of David, was. You knew who David was. You knew who Solomon was. But there may have been some people in there that you never heard of. How many people did you know all of the forebearers of say Jesse, the son of the father of David? I don't know if they mentioned all of them. Maybe they did, but in many cases the genealogies did skip over. So we don't know how old Achan was. Maybe he was young, and he was certainly at least 20 years younger than Joshua. And Joshua addressed him as my son. And so I don't know if that is because he was younger, or if that was an address that that Joshua would have used as in his role as being the senior man in the house of Israel there. So at any rate, to me, it's kind of even all the more heartbreaking there that he would use the term "my son." It's kind of an intimate way of talking to someone, especially since we know what the outcome would have been. Now, Achan readily confesses his sin. He said, "Yep, I didn't do it. I did it." He and perhaps he was contrite, and he had a repentant heart. We don't know, or maybe he was just going ahead and confessing because he says, "Well, look, my goose is cooked anyway. As might as well don't make it any harder for me." We have no idea. The Bible doesn't talk about it, but regardless of his confession, there are consequences from sin, and in this particular case, God had already decided. Okay, had said when we identify the person, the penalty is death. So, and that's what some people don't realize. They don't want to admit that even though there is sin, and you ask forgiveness of sin, for sin, there may be consequences. You live a life of sin all your life, and then what happens? You're going to die eventually. Maybe you're going to die with a disease that was a consequence of your sin. I guess some of the things that people will let's see, say drug addiction or alcohol addiction or something like that. It affects your body. People that have lived a promiscuous life, they may catch a disease that destroys their health. those kinds of things are a consequence of your sin. And so, even
This
though he
whole
confessed
this
that he
whole
had,
thing with the disease, it's pretty interesting. I did, I was a pre-med student. So I'm sure Cynthia may have studied stuff like that as well. But there's a lot of spiritually rooted diseases. I'm not saying they're all spiritually rooted, but even nowadays, there's actually a book. I don't know if you guys heard of it. It's a pastor, Dr. Henry Wright. It's called A More Excellent Way, and he states like testimonies after he spoke with the Lord and said, why are these people not getting healed when I pray for them? And he had an awesome revelation. He wrote a book about a lot of spiritually rooted diseases that people have nowadays, like allergies, even eczema, like things like that. They are written in the Bible. I don't know if any of you guys have ever heard of it, but it's really worth checking it out. And the Bible says test all things and hold on to what's good. So
sure. Okay. What's the name of the book?
it's called A Better Way. More Excellent Way. A
Oh,
More Excellent Way.
okay. Sounds interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
And we are, we are kind of, in many cases, I'm not saying every case, because sometimes things will happen to us or we're predisposed through our DNA or whatever. But, if you eat enough cream puffs, that's what you're going to look like, a cream puff. And so that's kind of um, kind of a light way of looking at it. But yeah, we are what we eat. So Richard puts out there Deuteronomy 12:23 is Jewish law that requires burial. And so, yeah, it has become the tradition as such, and they've taken that one and then applied it to everything. Okay, let's go ahead and the so Joshua. I'm going to go ahead and read all the way to the end of the chapter here. So Joshua sent messengers who ran to the tent, and behold, it was buried in his tent with the silver underneath it. Then they took them from the middle of the tent and brought them to Joshua and to all Bnei Israel, and they laid them down before Adonai. Then Joshua and all Israel with him took Achan, son of Zerah, the silver, the mantle, the gold, or the wedge of gold, his sons, his daughters, his oxen, his donkeys, his sheep, and his tent, and all that he had, and brought them to the valley of Achor. And then Joshua said, why have you brought trouble on us? Adonai will trouble you this day. Then all Israel stoned him with stones, burned them with fire, and stoned them with stones. They raised over him a great heap of stones that stands to this day. Then Adonai turned from the fierceness of his anger. Therefore, the name of that place has been called the Valley of Achor to this day. All right. Now, the messengers ran to the tent of Achan. Okay. Now, they would not have been any less obedient, because the Bible just says that Joshua sent messengers. He didn't say, okay, you guys, I want you to run as fast as you can to the tent. Now, the Bible doesn't indicate that. So, they would not have been any less obedient if they had just marched, but there seemed to be an urgency to get this sin out of the camp and to resolve this whole curse thing. And so they found the articles right where Achan said they would be. They brought all the articles to Joshua and the elders, and they laid it out before the Lord, it said. So that means to me that they had laid it out before the Ark of the Covenant. And so I don't know if the ark was outside the tabernacle, the Mishkan at this point, or if it was inside and they just brought it in and placed it. I kind of want to think that it was still in the traveling mode, in the mode of warfare, because they just come from from Jericho and had not had time to set up the Mishkan yet. So the ark was still out and visible to the people. So they laid this all of the stolen goods before the ark, before the Lord, and then they said that they brought Achan, all his family, everything that he owned was brought to the valley of Achor, which actually what that means in the Hebrew, the Achor is trouble, the valley of trouble. So it was kind of a play on the wording there. So then Joshua, in effect, pronounced the sentence on him. He said, why have you caused all this trouble on us? Well, today God is going to be troubling you. So Achan, I finally did it. I slipped up. It's Achan was stoned to death by all Israel. Okay, now when it says all Israel, they didn't line up, however many 600,000 or 2 million people walking by and throwing a rock at Achan. Now, when they say that all Israel, it was the representatives, the head of Israel, every tribe and the elders and so forth would have been represented in there, and they would have had the responsibility to do that. But then later, the people probably did come by, and then they could throw a stone on the heap. But they burned Achan and everything that he owned. Now, there are some that say, well, that's a terrible way to do things, because how about his donkey and his camel? They didn't know any better. They were just dumb animals. But when someone takes the things that were separated unto God, then the Bible talks about that everything they touch is unholy then and unclean. And so what about the children, his sons and his daughters? Were they also executed? There are some that say, well, yes, they were, because because of the nature of things, they would have certainly known that he had hidden these articles in the tent floor, and so that would have made them accessories to the crime, and so we really don't know. It's I've read several of the commentaries that quite a few, in fact, that some of them say yes, the whole family, everyone was stoned to death, and others say, well, maybe not. We just don't know. And I think that basically what it is the jury is out here. We don't know whether the entire family was stoned, because if they were innocent, the Bible does prohibit punishing the children for the innocent children for the sins of the father. But at the same time, it's kind of hard to believe that, okay, they're living in this big tent, that they didn't know that he had stolen that stuff. So anyway, that is the end of the chapter. So we end up kind of with a question: Did all of his family get stoned and burned? We don't know. We just know that Achan was stoned and then his body burned as a further representation of the gravity of his crime, because that was just something that was not normally done, that you would burn a body, and then all of the stuff that they everything that he owned was burned, so that there was basically nothing left.